Right, let's give you other stories that are in the news at the moment. The 16 days of activism for no violence against women and children is underway. Sadly, the statistics are still stacked heavily against the most vulnerable. The GBVF Response Fund says the South African data on GBF against women with disabilities does not exist, which suggests higher risks for these women. Let's discuss this further now with Tshepo Sefothlelo. He is the head of marketing at the organization. Tshepo, thank you very much for your time. This is, of course, very concerning. Just help me understand, when you say that it's not reported, do you mean when the Minister of Police releases his report, he should say crimes or GBV acts against women with disabilities? What if he's just adding it to just women in general? Is your research finding that he doesn't have any statistics around that at all?
Hi, Masiho, and thank you very much for this opportunity. Actually, the stats of GBV that's being committed against girls and women globally, there's not much data. There's very little data. When you come to South Africa, there isn't any stats. Perhaps what we do need to do is interrogate the South African police services in terms when they release their stats. But we know that on a daily basis, whenever there's crime stats released or even gender-based violence stats and femicide released, they don't separate people with disabilities, but we know that they are quite vulnerable, right? So when we were looking for statistics in terms of to communicate the challenges that the persons with disabilities are facing, particularly when it comes to gender-based violence, what we could find was more generic. For example, according to We Decide, they did a study with a UN-led initiative, and they mentioned that between 40 and 68% of young women with disabilities would have experienced sexual violence before the age of 18. Now, if you look at a South African context, from a South African context, it's anything between 50 to 51%, where women would at one point face issues of GBV being committed against them. But when you look at this particular stats, when it comes to persons with disabilities, it says 40 to 68% by the age of 18. So you can see already from that perspective is we can be facing a particular challenge, and that's because they are one of the most vulnerable demographic when it comes to living with the able-bodied people.
All right. So what do you think the issue is? Is it because it's difficult for women living with disabilities to be able to actually go report these cases at police stations, how they're treated there, how they even get there? Do you think maybe that's what the problem is? Because in South Africa, there's also that issue that we have about under-reporting.
Yeah, so it actually that's a very good question, because it's it's various challenges, right? So the first one is, generally, if you look at any institutions or any initiatives, right? Let's put gender-based violence aside. If we look at general challenges and issues or any things or any programs that we have in the country, right? You'll often find that persons with disabilities are not sitting at the table. Now, when you add the issue of gender-based violence, then that issue becomes more exacerbated, it becomes more pronounced, and that's what we are seeing. We are seeing that generally, when it comes to statistics that involve or that has to do with persons living with disabilities, there's very little data that is available. But when you also shine the light of gender-based violence that's been committed against them, we see that those stats are lacking as well. So from our perspective, we wanted to highlight this particular issue during 16 days, because that's when everybody's ears and eyes are tuned into this particular issue. Even though we would like everybody's ears and eyes tuned into this issue every single day, because every single day a person is being violated and something is happening, whether they are abled or disabled, something is happening to them. And I think for us, that's why we wanted to highlight this, to say, yes, there is issues of gender-based violence and femicide in this country, but hang on. There are persons living with disabilities, and we are not talking about their challenges and their issue. And coincidentally, at the recent presidential summit on gender-based violence hosted by the president, we had civil society and activists that work with persons living with disabilities, lamenting all those that were at the table, whether it be decision makers, whether it be funders or us that are working, to say, guys, Have you forgotten about us?
Yeah.
We too, in those statistics, when it comes to GBV, where are we? What is happening? Because a lot is happening and what you find is if somebody is mentally challenged or somebody is visually impaired, that's when the perpetrators take advantage of them, right? So a blind lady or young lady will walk up to somebody and say, please, can you give me directions to a particular place? And what those people will do, they'll direct them to a place where they will take advantage of them or even rape them.
Yeah.
So it really is a challenge. It's something that we need to start focusing on as well.
And Tshepo, I think, besides that, for me, I think the concern when I read about the fact that you want to, make sure that South Africans are aware of this particular issue, for me, is that I've attended so many of these press briefings by the department in the presidency responsible for women and children, right? And a lot of the times they've spoken about, upskilling police stations and police officers themselves. For instance, someone who is impaired in terms of their hearing says that they cannot go to the police station to report unless they come with their own interpreter, because the police will first of all not understand what they're saying via the sign language, and then they won't be able to really read what their statements say because those statements are not then converted to Braille. So there's also that issue of making sure that there is resources and skills at the police station to be able to assist those living with disabilities to report crime.
Yeah, Maseko, that is such a valid point, right? And just to hone in on the example of deaf people, right, is if I am a child who was born deaf, right, 90% of the time, the parents or the home that I've been born to are people that can hear. So those people that I live with don't even understand me when I try to communicate with them. And sometimes it's not even about an issue of gender-based violence. I'm frustrated about something. There's one particular thing that I need to communicate. And what it does, it just builds a whole lot of tension within the family because there's zero understanding and communication. So you can just understand when I need to go, when something has happened to me, I've been violated, and now I need to go to tell to the police station or relay. The people that are accompanying me don't really understand what is happening. When they take me to the police station, even the police there themselves don't really understand what it is that I'm trying to say, or there's frustration on both sides. So often what happens is people are frustrated. They'd rather not go and report the issue because they know that nobody's going to understand them. But when it comes to mentally challenged individuals as well, is if something happens to them, chances are they're not going to report it because they fear that the system might judge them that, oh, because you are like this or because you are disabled, perhaps your child is not in the best environment for you to bring them up.
Yeah.
But if it was an able-bodied person that went to go report a crime, the child staying with them wouldn't be an issue. So it's really a number of issues we need to start looking and focusing it so that we can start helping everybody, because we are all South Africans at the end of the day.
I think we should all be embarrassed, actually, because we have, most of us actually as South Africans, shunned on people living with disabilities. You mentioned mental illness, and that, of course, always reminds me of a situation like Life Esidimeni, where we prove to the world how much we've forgotten about those living with disabilities. Tshepo Sefothlelo from the GBVF Response Fund, thank you very much for speaking to us.